The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 4, Dragon and Herdsman. Chapter 7. The comm clip went silent. Jack found himself staring down at nothing, his throat tight, his stomach twisting into a knot of fear and anger. It couldn't be. How could the mercenaries possibly have tracked the SNA across the Orion Arm to this fifth-rate planet? How could they possibly have known where to find him in Allison? Allison, who'd been so conveniently on the scene to spring him from their trap. Allison, who'd noted and even commented on the SNA's interworld transmitter. Allison, who'd talked him into coming into this nice little out-of-the-way system in the first place. A place where he and Dracos and the SNA could quietly disappear. Jack turned to look at her, expecting to see her Corvine pistol leveled at his stomach, a triumphant smile on her face. But the gun wasn't pointed at him, and her face was as taunt and horrified as he'd ever seen it. "Allison?" he asked carefully. She twitched, and as if a mask had suddenly dropped into place, the fear vanished from her expression. "I think we've got trouble," she said. "No kidding," Jack growled, scrambling to his feet. Dodging between and around the rolling Erasfest, he sprinted back down the path to the edge of the forest. It was as bad as he'd expected. In the distance over the mountains, he could see the SNA swooping and dodging through groups of wispy clouds. The two Gin 90s were right on its tail, their lasers flashing as they tried to bring it down. "Uncle Verge," he called, "how you doing?" "I'm open to suggestions," the computer's voice came back. "Try a Mirm-Pre maneuver," Draco said, his head rising from Jack's skin and pressing against his shirt as the dragon gazed out at the distant battle. "Break to your right! Now!" The SNA twisted sideways, dipping lower toward the mountains below. The two pursuit fighters shifted course to stay on it, and then suddenly the SNA's nose dropped and the ship dived straight down. Jack caught his breath. But even as the Gin 90s dived after him, Uncle Verge brought the nose sharply up again and spun the ship neatly 180 degrees around to point straight back at his attackers. They reacted instantly, wrenching away to either side to avoid ramming at full speed into the larger ship. But for one of them, it was too late. A double burst from the SNA's meteor defense lasers caught it squarely in the nose as it maneuvered, shattering it into a ball of flame. The other fighter was luckier, managing to dodge away from the short-range missile Uncle Verge fired at it. The SNA's lasers flashed at it as it fled, but before they could get a good target lock, the Gin 90 vanished out of sight behind one of the mountain peaks. "One down, yeah?" Uncle Verge said as the SNA's path curved around toward the forest. "Let's see if I can get back there and pick you up before he comes around the other side, yeah?" "We're ready," Jack said. There was the rustling of bushes behind him, and he glanced over his shoulder to see Allison jog into view. "Make it fast!" But Uncle Verge didn't make it fast. In fact, he didn't make it at all. It happened all at once, with perfect timing and coordination. From high in the sky, the capstan transport Uncle Verge had mentioned earlier suddenly dropped into view through the clouds, the sun glinting off its stubby wings, its belly weapons raining laser and particle beam fire down on the SNA. At the same time, the remaining Gin 90 reappeared from behind the mountain, zigzagging through its peaks as it charged toward the SNA's right flank. Two armed ships, and the SNA caught between them. Jack clenched his hands into fists, vaguely aware of Dracos' claws tightening reflexively against his skin. Uncle Verge was trapped like a rat in a cage. If he didn't surrender, and fast, the two attackers would cut the ship in half. "The saga of First Straw!" Dracos said suddenly, his head melting back onto Dracos' skin. "Minklai! Then the saga of Fistra!" Jack blinked. "What?" "Jack," Allison demanded as she came up beside him. She peered up at the mountains, shading her eyes with her hand. "Uh-oh." "Minklai, then Fistra!" Uncle Verge acknowledged, his voice tight. "See ya, Jack lad." "What's a Minklai?" Allison asked, throwing a frown at Jack's comm clip. Jack was still trying to think of a good answer to that when the SNA twisted suddenly like a hooked fish, spun to the side, and raked the incoming Jin 90 with a full salvo from its lasers. Half hidden by the brilliant flashes, a pair of missiles arrowed in a 1-2 punch. The missile fire exploded against the side of the mountain as the fighter passed, blanketing the attacker in a flow of shattered ice and rock. The second arced straight into the middle of the avalanche. There was another ball of flame, and now only the capstan was left. But the maneuver had cost the SNA dearly. Its sideways skid had robbed it of most of its forward momentum, and Jack could see Uncle Verge fighting for stability in the churning mountain winds. Even as the transport dropped lower, its attack intensifying, the SNA rolled over and plummeted toward the cliffs below. It disappeared behind a peak, and there was one final violent explosion. The capstan veered sharply away, bouncing as it was buffeted by the blast. Jack stared at the fading light and smoke, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Uncle Verge?" he whispered toward his comm clip. "Uncle Verge?" There was no answer. In the distance, the capstan's pilot had gotten the transport back under control and returned to the area above the final explosion's fading glow. Slowly, it circled the area, its weapons silent, which could only mean that Colonel Frost no longer had anything to shoot at. Dimly, Jack felt his muscles starting to shake, his vision blurring with tears. Uncle Verge, the SNA, everything he'd known since he was 3 years old. It couldn't all be gone. Not here. Not now. He jerked violently as a hand suddenly touched his shoulder. He turned, trying to see through the tears. "Come on," Allison said quietly. "Where?" Jack asked, his voice quavering. It was a sign of weakness Uncle Virgil had always hated, but Jack no longer cared. "Into the forest," Allison said. "We have to get under cover." "Why?" "Because they'll be coming here next," she said patiently. Her face was tight, and he could see an edge of fear lurking at the corner of her eyes. But her voice was calm and determined. "They'll have tracked the transmission from your comm clip." "So what?" Jack demanded bitterly. "So I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to give up just yet," she countered, some of her controls starting to crack. Jack shook his head. "It's finished, Allison," he said quietly. More finished than she would ever know, in fact. Jack, Dracos, the Kada, and Shantine, they were all dead. "Snap out of it," Allison ordered tartly, slapping him none too lightly across the back of his head. "Okay, your ship's gone. I'm sorry, but it's a long way from being finished. My friends, remember? My friends are coming to get me." Jack swiped at his eyes with his sleeve, a cautious flicker of hope stirring inside him. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm all right." "That's better," Allison said. "Come on." She got a grip on his arm and started pulling him back toward the path. "Where are we going?" Jack asked. "I've got camping gear in my travel bags, enough for a couple of weeks if we're careful," she said. "We break it out, pack it for travel, and find someplace to hole up." "What if they find us?" "Then we do what we can," she said. "It's still better than being caught out here in the open." Jack took another deep breath. She was right, of course, but the shock of losing the SNA still pressed like a strangle cord across his mind. It was hard to think about anything else, even survival. But Dracos wouldn't be nearly so handicapped. If Jack could just talk with him a moment. They reached the first turn in the path. "Go ahead and start packing," Jack told Allison, waving her ahead as he slowed down. "I need to do something first." She frowned. "Like what?" "It'll just take a second," he promised. "Go on, get going." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but hurry, and stay under the trees." She turned and disappeared around the turn. "Probably thinks I need to cry about the SNA," he muttered, looking down at Dracos. "Jack!" "No, it's all right," Jack cut him off. "The SNA was just a thing. In the great grand scheme, things aren't important." He swiped at his eyes again. "And Uncle Verge was just a computer program. I did my crying for the real Uncle Virgil a year ago." "I understand," Draco said. "However—" "Jack?" Allison's voice wafted over the bushes. "Come on, move it." "Coming," Jack called back. "What I need to know right now," he said, lowering his voice again, "is whether or not it's safe for us to stay with Allison." "Yes!" Draco said without hesitation.
I do not know why, but I believe we can trust her, at least for the moment.
Which wasn't to say she wasn't working some private agenda of her own, Jack reminded himself. Somewhere along the line, that agenda could easily branch off from his. Still, there had been that look on her face when Colonel Frost came on the comm. She apparently didn't want to see him any more than Jack did. Close enough, he told the dragon, starting forward again. Let's do it.
Jack!
Later, Jack said as he reached the clearing and again threaded his way through the lethargic Erasvas. Allison was busily stuffing the contents of the 2 travel bags into a pair of lightweight backpacks when he reached her. You get your booby trap set? She asked. Booby trap? Isn't that what you stayed behind for? She asked, frowning up at him briefly before returning to her sorting. To slow them down a little? I was going to, Jack lied. Clearly, his brain was still only working at half speed. But I figured the Erasvas might get caught before Frost's thugs got here. Probably right, she conceded. Maybe we can do something further on. Give me a hand. Sure. Jack dropped to his knees and started sorting a pack of ration bars into the 2 bags. As he did so, he felt a breath of hot air on the back of his neck. Twisting his head around, he found himself nose to muzzle with the gray-scaled Kada he'd noticed earlier. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Allison snatch her gun from its holster. Easy, he said quickly. For a long moment, the silvery eyes stared into his, as if the Kada was trying to work out who exactly this new creature was and what it was doing in its nice, quiet forest. Then the eyes blinked slowly, and the head turned away, and the Kada wandered off. Allison let her breath out in a huff. I sure hope you're right about them being well fed, she said, setting the gun down on the grass beside her. Jack gazed at the gray dragon as it sniffed along the edge of a fallen tree, an uncomfortable feeling stirring inside him. If Frost was one of Neverland's partners, he would know all about Kada, including the fact that Jack had one of his own. Which meant that when Frost and his men saw the Erasvas and their little group of pukas, You think we can get this done today? Allison's voice cut into Jack's musings. Sorry. Shaking the thought away, he got back to his packing. But the thought refused to leave. Frost, Neverland, the Kada. By the time Jack and Allison had the backpack sealed, he knew what he had to do. Okay, Allison said, hoisting her pack onto her shoulders and bouncing it once to settle it into place. I thought we'd head west to the foothills we saw from orbit. They look pretty rocky. There should be some caves in there where we can hole up. Sounds good, Jack said, bracing himself. Allison was not going to like this at all. But we're taking the pukas with us. To his mild surprise, she didn't explode in anger or disbelief. She just stood there, one hand gripping her backpack strap, staring at him. And how exactly do you propose we do that? It was, Jack decided, a very good question. Unfortunately, he hadn't yet come up with an answer for it. I'll go talk to Hren, he said, taking a couple of steps back and turning around. He spotted the bigger Rasva at the far side of the clearing and headed in that direction.
Jack, what are you doing?
Dracos asked from his shoulder. You want to leave your fellow Kada to the mercenaries? Jack asked.
Perhaps they would be better off dead,
Dracos muttered, his voice dark. Jack looked down at him. You really believe that? Draco sighed, a touch of warm dragon breath across Jack's chest.
No, of course not,
he said reluctantly.
What is your plan?
Still working on it, Jack said between clenched teeth. 50 Kada wandering around, plus however many were currently riding their Arasva hosts. Call it 60 or 70. If he wanted all the Kada, that meant 60 or 70 Arasva hosts as well, all of them bullying their way through the forest. Leave a trail Frostmen could follow in their sleep. Unless... Dracos, how long does a Kada have to stay on his host? He asked.
He can stay on as long as he wishes,
Dracos said, sounding puzzled. I know he can, Jack said. How long does he have to? An hour? 2 hours?
No more than an hour to fully recover,
Draco said, suddenly thoughtful.
Perhaps less.
So that means each Arasva should be able to carry 7 Kada, Jack said, trying to work it out in his still sluggish mind. 1 hour on, 6 hours off.
Yes, that may work,
Draco said slowly.
Though it would be safer to include a margin of error.
Well, we'll put 6 on each Arasva then, Jack agreed. Any idea how many there are?
60,
Draco said.
I counted them.
So we'll need 10 Arasva, Jack concluded. Unless you think I should take a few of them myself.
We would still need 10 Arasva,
Draco said.
Besides, I must be free to act at any time.
Point, Jack agreed with a shiver. Even with a poet warrior of the Kada on their side, the odds here weren't looking very good.
Of course, that also assumes we can make the Pukas understand all this,
Dracos went on.
That may prove difficult.
Maybe Hren can help, Jack suggested. They must have some way of communicating with them.
Perhaps,
Dracos muttered.
Assuming Hren himself understands.